else that I think is important, and that is the recognition, here or in the West, we are trained to focus on some leader. Generally, there's a country that now has been determined adversarial, so we know whatever country that is, the leader is a dictator. And we must actually free the people by bombing them or starving them, things like this, from this evil dictator. And here in the United States, as we see, or anywhere in the West, when we see our country falling to ruin, it's the result of the wrong leader. The system's fine. The manager of the system needs to go from Joe Biden to Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump, fill in the blank, or one of the parties. You see the Republican Party, they're saying the Democratic Party is mismanaging the system, blah, 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 right? It's all about the party or the system. The party or the person, most likely the person. Okay. It seems to me that the resistance realized something, that a Joe Biden is just a mask for these global financial capital people, right? That he's just a mask for power. And rather than punch at Joe Biden, he's a jerk, he's an idiot, Rishi Sunak is this, or Macron, or laugh at Olaf Scholz, as I love to do. So I just enjoy, laughing at Olaf Scholz. So forgive me, guilty pleasures. But my point being, they actually realize that if you want to punch at these people, you have to punch at the financial power. And that's what they're doing, which the people, unfortunately, on the streets in the West don't seem to realize. Now, I will say this, the other thing, they're boycotting Starbucks or McDonald's or whatever. They realize it is the economic power and the corporate power that is really where the strength is, and that these leaders are just falsehoods. They're just fakes thrown out there to give. So I'll put it like this. They give us a punching bag. I can punch Joe Biden or an effigy or burn an effigy of Joe Biden all day long, which he's literally an effigy of himself at this point. And they can sit back and say, you're going after the puppets and we're the puppeteers. But the Ansar Allah, the Yemeni people, the resistance who are boycotting Starbucks, these people realize that the real power is in these corporate oligarchical figures. At any rate, go ahead. Your thoughts on that?
I would go further than saying they're giving us a punching bag. I would say they're giving us an entire distraction circus. And it is a huge machinery of distraction over here, while the real people who are making the real decisions are far away over here, and they're behind a door. You don't know who they are. You don't know what decisions they're making. None of it is covered anywhere in your media. Not the people, not the decision-making process, not the decisions that they've taken. None of it. Over here, we've got this whole charade of bourgeois democracy, elections, the media that covers it and keeps us busy looking at it and tells us that somehow it's all got to do with the personalities of this or that, leader. And they do the same with history, right? How many times have you heard analyses of Hitler's personality, his childhood, his diet, for God's sake, right? As if this somehow has some significance for how World War II happened. In Marxism, there's an understanding that every state is a dictatorship. Because a state machine, by its very nature, is a machinery for the holding down of one class by another. That's how you get social peace. Social peace comes about because one class is successfully holding down the other, and it's not breaking out into open conflict all the time, right? So, it's a useful, in a class society, you have to have a state machine to hold the class antagonisms in check and to hold down the oppressed class. So in the slave-owning society, there was a state machinery to make sure that the slaves stayed in their place. In a feudal society, there was a state machinery to make sure that the serfs stayed in their place. Now, in capitalist society, we have a state machinery to make sure that the working class stays in its place. And in a state, you have a dictatorship of one class over another. And the question, therefore, is which class is having the dictatorship? So in a capitalist class, we have a dictatorship of capital over the workers. We also have democracy for the capitalists. They get to debate and vote and, have input into decisions, right? Although even there, what we find is the more that monopoly develops, the more that a smaller and smaller and smaller section of the ruling class, the owners of the biggest monopoly corporations and these days it's like hedge funds, isn't it, that are just so huge, right, that they've got a controlling stake in so much, not just of the national economy, but of the world economy, that there's a tiny handful of people who really are between themselves having a say. It's democracy for them, right? Increasing numbers of even, small bourgeois are finding themselves, outraged by how outside of the decision-making process they are, right? But, the bourgeoisie has the papers, the pages of the paper open to it. The bourgeoisie has editorial input into the media, in a way that the working class doesn't. The working class is a victim of a media machinery, and it's a massive machinery of manipulation and confusion, distraction and diversion. But these people who the imperialists put on the front of their system, that's exactly what they're servants. They're not the ruling class. They're not the real owners of the world's wealth. They are servants of the rulers of the world. They're very well paid servants. They're bought and paid for. They get big fat bribes to be loyal servitors for the system, right? I kind of call them the Mandarin class. You've got a whole section of people who work in the machine of keeping the system going as its front people. So some of them are in the media and some of them are in politics, but they're interchangeable, a lot of them, in terms of their role. They're talking heads for the system, and they're there to prettify it. And you're absolutely right that when it comes to the resistance, the things that they start to realise from bitter experiences, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. It doesn't matter who's sitting in the chair in number 10. That is not what's going to change the parameters of the struggle for liberation for these people. Because imperialism is not the policy that's decided by the guy who we elect. It isn't. So imperialism is a system. It's not a policy, number one. And number two, in terms of kicking the imperialists out of your country in order to get sovereignty, that's something that can only be done, as you said, by defeating the imperialists in a way that they can't respond to anymore. So you're right, it's financial, it's military, it's technological. The controls that the imperialists have on our lives essentially come through the economics of the system, but it's backed up by military. And the military supremacy comes from technological supremacy. So these are the targets. I saw a really interesting article about the Yemeni fight against Americans in the Red Sea, and how the Americans are kind of saying, or the US, I should say, people from the rest of America get very cross when you call the USA the Americans. The US authorities or military is kind of trumpeting about the fact that they're able to defeat, shoot down missiles that the Yemenis are sending their way in the Red Sea. But one of the commentaries I read was very interesting. It said, the economics of this do not add up, because the missiles that the US is launching to defeat a Yemeni missile cost millions of dollars each a time. And the ones that and they can't replace them quickly. The USA has a really messed up military situation. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. But they can't just fire them forever. They haven't just got a limitless supply of these things. On the other hand, the weapons, the missiles that the Yemenis are sending cost a couple of $1,000s to produce, and they can produce them in hidden factories even without electricity.